My name is Eleanor, and I am 80 years old. I have lived long enough to see the world change in ways that still astonish me. But nothing could prepare me for the changes that happened inside my own home. For nearly a decade, I have been living under the same roof as my son Harold and his wife, Clarissa. At first, I believed that sharing a house would mean sharing warmth, laughter, and mutual respect. But with time, I learned that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not outside, but within your very walls. Clarissa came into my son's life like a polished jewel, bright and demanding. She was much younger than Harold, elegant in her own way, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed her attention. From the start, I noticed her eyes drifting across my living room as if she were already planning how to redecorate it. When they moved in with me, she made it clear that she considered this house hers as well, not just a temporary arrangement. At first, I gave in to her whims. I cooked the meals she preferred, folded the laundry she left in careless piles, and entertained her guests when she wanted to impress people from her social circles. I told myself that sacrifice was part of love, that bending would keep my family united. But bending turned into breaking. Slowly, I became invisible, treated not as Eleanor, the woman who had worked 40 years as a school librarian to pay off this very house, but as a maid who had no right to rest. It reached its boiling point one late November afternoon. Clarissa entered my kitchen without knocking, wearing a glittering silver gown that shimmered under the fluorescent lights, far too glamorous for a simple weekday. She had that smile I knew too well, a smile that hid demands behind its sweetness. "Eleanor," she said, in a tone as smooth as syrup, but as sharp as a knife, "I have something wonderful to tell you. My family will be spending the entire holiday season here. Just 30 people, give or take. Isn't that marvelous? 30 people, not 3, not 10, 30. As though I had the strength of an army, as though I were some tireless worker machine." My hands trembled, but not from fear this time, it was from the storm building inside me. She went on, listing cousins, uncles, and friends I had never met, painting a picture of grand dinners, dazzling decorations, and endless festivities. And of course, she expected me to cook, clean, and serve. I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I felt my voice return to me, strong and steady. "Marvelous indeed," I said, watching her grin widen. Then I added, "Marvelous for you, because I won't be here." The color drained from her face. For the first time since she had walked into my life, Clarissa looked unsure. She blinked, searching for words, but only a faint whisper came out, "You won't." "What?" "I won't be here," I repeated. "You can host your grand celebration, but you'll do it without me. I am nobody's servant, and I refuse to play that role any longer." Her eyes widened with outrage, and for a brief second, I saw fear behind her fury. She knew something had shifted, and nothing would ever return to the way it had been. Clarissa's painted lips parted as though she had swallowed something sour, and she clutched the edge of the counter for balance. Her polished nails tapped against the marble surface like nervous raindrops. "You can't be serious, Eleanor," she hissed, her sweet mask slipping into something sharper. "Harold promised me that this would be the most extraordinary Christmas our family has ever seen. I've already told my mother, my brothers, my cousins. They've booked flights, rearranged their schedules, spent their money. You can't simply walk away because you're feeling tired." Tired. That word pierced through me like a thorn. For years, I had been more than tired. I had been drained, emptied, used like a tool, and placed back on the shelf only to be pulled out when needed again. I straightened my back, letting the weight of 8 decades of survival give power to my words. "I'm not tired, Clarissa. I'm finished." There is a difference. Her eyes flickered with panic before they sharpened into anger. She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if the walls might betray her secrets. "Harold won't allow this. You know he won't. He loves his family, and he knows how important this is to me. You're being selfish." I almost laughed. Selfish. A woman who had sacrificed her youth to raise a son alone after losing her husband in a factory accident, who had worked double shifts at the library and given up vacations so her child could attend a decent college, was now being called selfish because she refused to cook for 30 strangers. But I held back the laughter, because this moment wasn't for mockery. It was for truth. "You've mistaken my silence for weakness," I told her, my voice calm but steady. "And Harold may love you, but this house is mine. It has always been mine. I built it brick by brick with sweat and sacrifice, and you will not turn me into a shadow inside my own home." Her cheeks flushed crimson, and she spun on her heel, the sequins of her dress scattering light across the room like shards of broken glass. I could hear her heels strike against the hardwood floor as she stormed toward the door. Just as she reached it, it opened from the other side, and there stood Harold, weary from a long day at work. "Darling," she cried, rushing into his arms as though she had been wronged, "your mother has lost her mind. She says she won't help with Christmas. She says she's leaving us with everything." Her voice trembled with well-practiced desperation, and she buried her face against his chest like a child seeking comfort. Harold's eyes met mine over her shoulder. For a moment, I saw the boy I had raised. The boy who once held my hand in crowded streets, who once whispered his dreams into my ear. But now those eyes belonged to a man who had been softened by convenience, molded by his wife's demands, and dulled by years of avoiding conflict. He sighed, heavy and tired, then stepped into the kitchen, still holding Clarissa's hand. "Mother," he began, his tone patient but patronizing, "surely you don't mean what you said. It's Christmas. It's 1 week of work, and then things go back to normal. Clarissa has already invited everyone. Do you really want to cause such embarrassment?" Normal. That word again, the word they both wielded like a chain around my neck. Normal meant me in the kitchen at dawn, me cleaning up after midnight, me invisible except when they needed food on the table, or clothes neatly folded. Normal had taken 10 years of my life and ground them down to dust. I drew a deep breath and met my son's gaze. "I am not going back to normal," I said softly. "Not ever again." Harold's jaw tightened. Clarissa peeked up at him with a gleam of triumph in her eyes, certain he would force me into submission. But what neither of them knew was that I had been preparing for this day for months, and my decision was not a whim. It was justice. The silence that followed my words hung heavy in the air, thicker than the smell of the stew simmering on the stove. Clarissa shifted restlessly, her heels tapping the floor in sharp beats of impatience, while Harold rubbed the bridge of his nose as if my refusal were some kind of childish tantrum he had to endure. He finally muttered, "Mother, don't do this. We've already promised. 30 people are counting on us." I smiled, a small, steady smile that came not from joy but from the clarity of conviction. "Then those 30 people will have to count on you and your wife, because I am not a servant to be commanded whenever it suits you." Clarissa gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as though I had slapped her. "You see," she cried dramatically, "she doesn't care about family. She doesn't care about traditions. She's trying to ruin everything for us." "No," I replied firmly. "What ruins everything is disrespect. And for 10 years, neither of you has shown me even an ounce of it." Harold looked startled at my tone, as though he had just realized the mother he thought would always bend had learned how to stand tall again. He opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance. I had swallowed my voice long enough. "You speak of traditions, Clarissa," I continued, my eyes fixed on her. "But traditions are not about showing off with glittering gowns or crowded parties. They are about love, gratitude, and respect. You have turned them into a stage for your own performance, and I will not play a role in your little theater anymore." Her face twisted, and I could see her calculating her next move. I knew her well by now. When anger failed, she would turn to manipulation, and right on cue, her voice softened, dripping with counterfeit sweetness. "Eleanor, please, don't talk like this. You're like a second mother to me. We need you. I can't possibly handle so many people without your guidance. Think of how it will look if you abandon us now." There it was. The plea disguised as affection. The guilt wrapped in velvet words. Once, those tactics might have worked on me. Once, I might have been moved by her tears, her trembling voice, her promises of love. But not anymore. If I were truly a mother to you, I said calmly, you would never have treated me like a maid. Her eyes narrowed, the false sweetness vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. She turned to Harold, clutching his arm. Tell her she has no choice. This is our house too. One day it will be ours entirely. Those words cut deeper than any insult. So that was her plan all along, not to build a family, but to wait until I was gone and claim what I had spent my life working for. I saw Harold flinch at her slip, but he said nothing. His silence was worse than her cruelty. I leaned back against the counter, folding my arms. Interesting, I murmured. Very interesting to hear you say that out loud. Clarissa stiffened, realizing too late what she had revealed. Her lips parted, searching for a way to undo the words, but nothing came. I held her gaze, letting the weight of the moment settle. She had shown her true heart, and no amount of acting could disguise it now. At that exact moment, the clock on the wall chimed 6 keys. Its hollow notes echoed through the kitchen, as if marking the end of an old life and the beginning of a new one. I turned away from them both, my hands steady as I began to wash the few dishes left in the sink. I will be leaving tomorrow morning, I said without looking up. I already have my plans arranged. Where I go and how long I stay is none of your concern. You will manage just fine without me. Clarissa's scream split the air like glass shattering. Tomorrow, you can't. My family arrives in 3 days. This is madness. Then, I replied, drying my hands with deliberate calm. Perhaps you should have thought about that before you built your holiday dreams on my back. Clarissa's voice rose higher with each word, the sharpness cutting through the kitchen like shards of ice. You can't abandon us like this, Eleanor. My relatives are already expecting a feast, a house full of decorations, music, laughter, everything. They'll think I'm incompetent if they arrive and nothing is prepared. Do you want to humiliate me? She gripped Harold's arm so tightly that her knuckles turned pale, her entire body trembling with indignation. Harold shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between us like a man caught in a storm he had no umbrella for. He finally muttered, Mother, maybe you should consider how hard this is for Clarissa. She works part-time at the gallery, and she doesn't have the time or energy to plan something of this size. His tone was gentle, pleading, as if he believed logic could bend me back into silence. I turned to him slowly, the son I had carried through fevers and school struggles, the boy who once promised me he would take care of me when I grew old. And what about me, Harold? I asked, my voice steady but heavy with years of swallowed pain. Do I not tire? Do I not have the right to live my days in peace, without being ordered around? You talk about her work as if it were the weight of the world, but for 10 years I have been her unpaid laborer. I deserve rest more than anyone in this house. Clarissa stepped forward, her perfume filling the space like smoke, suffocating and heavy. This isn't about rest, Eleanor. This is about family, about appearances. My Uncle Gregory is flying in from Texas. My cousin Amelia is coming from overseas. These people hold influence. They can help Harold's career if everything goes well. Do you want to ruin his future because of stubborn pride? So there it was, the true reason laid bare. This grand gathering wasn't about love or togetherness. It was a calculated display to impress wealthy relatives who might hand out favors if they were entertained well enough. My heart sank, not because I hadn't suspected it, but because hearing it out loud confirmed the depth of her deception. I looked at Harold, just hoping that he would object, that he would defend the values I had taught him as a child. But he stood silent, and silence is often louder than any agreement. I placed the dish towel down and folded my arms across my chest. So your plan is to use me as the backbone of your little spectacle. Cook, clean, serve, smile, all so you can pretend to be what you are not. And if I refuse, suddenly I am the selfish one. No, Clarissa, I see your game now, and I will not play it. Her voice cracked as anger clashed with panic. But what will they think of me if they arrive to chaos? They'll never respect me again. Then, perhaps, I answered coldly, they will see the truth, that you invited them without the capacity to host them, and that your grand illusion is nothing more than that, an illusion. Harold stepped closer, placing his hand gently on my shoulder. Once, that gesture would have softened me, would have reminded me of his innocence. But now it felt like an attempt to guide me back into chains. Mother, he said quietly, don't do this. Think about it. If you really need a break, you can take it after New Year's. We'll even pay for your trip. Anywhere you want. I met his eyes, and in them I saw desperation, not love. His offer was nothing more than a bribe to buy back my obedience for just a little while longer. Too late, I whispered. Far too late. I turned away, letting the silence of my decisions settle like iron around them. They could scream, plead, manipulate, or bribe, but my course was set. I had been planning this moment for months, and my strength was not shaken by their fear. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a different life, one in which I was no longer their invisible worker, but my own free woman once more. That night, after the argument had finally drained them both of breath and sound, I sat alone in the dim living room with a pot of tea gone cold beside me, and the house sounding like a ship settling into a long, patient tide. I reflected on the years on the mortgages paid, the overtime shifts shelved like quiet trophies, the library evenings where I shelved other people's stories while my own life felt shelved away. I remembered the day I found the stack of envelopes buried at the back of Harold's home office drawer. How my fingers had paused over the unfamiliar card names, the way my stomach had tightened like a fist. Those papers were small betrayals at first glance: bank slips, merchant receipts, little PDFs printed from midnight purchases, but together they formed a map of deception. Clarissa had been spending money she did not have, charges in Harold's name, phantom loans, luxury purchases with glamorous receipts that did not match the modest paychecks she claimed to earn at the gallery. Her lies had a currency, and she had been spending it on a future that looked to spend my home as collateral. After the initial shock came an icy, meticulous calm. I am 80 years old. I have learned when to let rage warm into strategy. So I did what I could not have done 5 years earlier. I made a plan. First, I moved what little savings I had into a new account at a different bank, under an alias that would be nearly impossible for anyone to link to our everyday lives. I met with an attorney, someone quiet and efficient, and we discussed placing the deed into a protective arrangement that would make it legally impractical for anyone to pressure me into selling the house. Then I hired a private investigator, a gentleman recommended by an old friend at church, who had the patience to follow paper trails and the tact to gather truths without rousing suspicion. Within weeks, the picture became clearer and uglier. More than frivolous shopping, there were transactions tied to loans using our property as leverage, and conversations, emails, texts, threads, where Clarissa and certain acquaintances plotted how to present a false prosperity to relatives so that favors would be wielded at the right time. I could have stormed and screamed then. Instead, I chose a quieter weapon. I drafted measured letters to the few relatives who actually mattered in Clarissa's scheme: her uncle Gregory, who often spoke of business ventures and investments; her brother Marcus, who dabbled in property; and her cousin Amelia, who had a reputation for fiscal prudence. In those letters, I posed as an anxious mother-in-law, concerned for Harold and his future, and attached a few carefully selected documents that outlined the scale of the debt and the risky proposals Clarissa had been entertaining. I did not want to shame a young woman with public spectacle. I wanted to show the people who would decide to help whether there was reason to intervene. The replies came in quick succession, measured and furious. Gregory wrote that he was stunned and wanted to arrive earlier than planned to speak. Face to face, he insisted on the 22nd instead of the 24th. Marcus coldly withdrew any talk of assistance. Amelia offered to come and assess the finances herself and promised to bring a trusted friend who worked in legal counsel. The timing was perfect. I felt an odd lift in my chest, a buoyant relief that had nothing to do with malice and everything to do with protection. I booked a small suite at a coastal in an hour away, nothing ostentatious, just a room with a view and a door I could close. I left instructions with my lawyer for what to do should the situation devolve, and I prepared a brief, precise note for the kitchen table. In the note, I would explain that I had left on a short trip and that they would have to manage the household while I was away. I did not relish the thought of their embarrassment. I did relish the end of my servitude. I wanted them to see the consequences of their presumption, not as punishment, but as a mirror. For the first time in years, I slept without the weight of obligation pressing me into the mattress. The morning light crept through the curtains, golden and calm, but inside the house the air was thick with tension. I moved slowly, deliberately, savoring the rhythm of my own choices. For the first time in a decade, every step I took belonged to me. I brewed a cup of coffee not because someone demanded it but because I wanted the aroma to fill the kitchen while I folded clothes into my suitcase. Each garment I packed carried a story: shirts I had worn on long bus rides to work, dresses I had mended through careful stitches, a warm shawl crocheted by a friend long past. Every item placed in the bag was more than fabric. It was a declaration that my life had meaning beyond servitude. From upstairs, I could hear the restless shifting of Harold and Clarissa. Their voices carried faintly, muffled but urgent. At one point I caught the edge of a phrase: Clarissa, insisting that I would change my mind. Harold muttering something about keeping peace, but I did not linger to decipher. Their storm was theirs to weather. Mine had already passed, and the sky ahead was clear. By mid-morning, I had placed the note carefully on the kitchen table. It was short, respectful, and unyielding. I have decided to take some time for myself. I wish you both the best with your gathering. The house is yours to manage while I am gone. I left a spare set of keys beside it, the gesture deliberate, a symbol that I was not running away, only reclaiming the right to step out on my own terms. Before leaving, I walked one last time through the rooms of the house. The walls carried echoes of Harold's laughter as a boy, the smell of books and old paper from the decades I worked at the library, the soft hum of prayers whispered when I feared I would not make the mortgage. Every corner reminded me of battles fought and won, not for Clarissa's vanity, but for survival, dignity, and love. That love still remained, but it was love for myself that now guided my steps. At exactly noon, I closed the front door behind me. The sound was final, like the last page of a long chapter. My suitcase rolled over the front path, and with each step toward the waiting cab, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The driver smiled as he placed the bag in the trunk, unaware that he was transporting more than luggage. He was carrying my freedom. The inn by the sea welcomed me with the gentle crash of waves and the scent of salt carried on the wind. I checked into my modest suite, opened the window wide, and allowed the ocean air to wash over me. The bed was soft, the sheets crisp, and for the first time in years, I lay down in the middle of the day without guilt. I closed my eyes, not to escape, but to rest. That evening, I received the first message. Uncle Gregory's name appeared on my phone screen. His tone clipped and businesslike. Eleanor, we will be arriving tomorrow morning. Please expect us early. We want to speak with Harold and Clarissa directly. I smiled as I placed the phone on the bedside table. Perfect timing. By the time they arrived, I would be gone from the house, leaving Clarissa to face the storm she had brewed with her own lies. I sipped tea by the window as the sun dipped low, painting the sea in streaks of fire. For years, I had been the silent backbone of a house that did not respect me. Now, I was simply Eleanor again, a woman, not a worker, not a servant. And tomorrow, the truth would finally step through the same doors where lies had once reigned. The next morning, while gulls wheeled above the shoreline and the inn's dining room filled with the clatter of breakfast plates, I stirred sugar into my tea and thought about what was unfolding back at the house. I imagined Clarissa waking late, expecting to find me bent over pots and pans, only to discover instead the note on the table. I pictured her manicured fingers trembling as she read the words, her voice shrill as she called for Harold, the panic rising when she realized I truly meant it. By the time Uncle Gregory and the others arrived, the stage would be set for a confrontation that had nothing to do with me. My absence would not be cowardice, it would be strategy, the quiet refusal that forced the truth to surface. I did not have to wait long for confirmation. Before noon, my phone buzzed with a flood of calls. First Harold, then Clarissa, then Harold again. I let them ring unanswered, each vibration against the table like a drumbeat, reminding me of my decision. Finally, a message came through, Clarissa's words frantic and uneven. "They're here early. Gregory is furious. Amelia is asking for documents. What did you tell them?" I stared at the screen, calm as the tide, and set it aside. The answers she sought were already surrounding her. While they scrambled, I took a slow walk along the pier. Children darted around me with kites, fishermen untangled their nets, and an old couple shared a quiet bench. No one there looked at me as a servant. I was simply another soul among many, and in that ordinariness I found freedom. My mind drifted back to the investigators' reports, the credit accounts stacked like fragile towers, the boutique wages exaggerated into fairy tales, the whispered plans to sell my home under the guise of family progress. All of it had seemed overwhelming when I discovered it months ago, but now it was no longer mine to carry. Clarissa would have to account for her own deceptions, and Harold would have to face the choice he had avoided for years: truth or denial. Late in the afternoon, I returned to my room to rest. Another message awaited me, this time from Amelia. "Thank you for your honesty. You were right to warn us. We are addressing the matter directly. I hope you find peace during your holiday." The words made me exhale a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Not only had my actions protected myself, but they had pierced the web of lies before it could ensnare Harold any further. That night, I dined alone by candlelight in the inn's small restaurant. The waiter, polite and unhurried, placed before me a plate of roasted vegetables and fish. I savored each bite, thinking how strange it felt to eat without glancing over my shoulder, to see who else needed feeding. For once, nourishment was not a chore, but a gift to myself. I raised a glass of water to the empty chair across from me, whispering quietly, "To freedom." And as the sea murmured beyond the windows and laughter from other tables drifted around me, I realized something profound. Liberation does not always come with trumpets or fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like the tide slipping over sand, steady and unstoppable. Tomorrow would bring more revelations for Harold and Clarissa, but tonight belonged to me. Morning folded into afternoon before I finally answered a call, not because I wanted to hear their chaos, but because the ringtone carried Harold's old softness, a tone I had not heard in years. His voice arrived hushed and wobbly, as if the weight of truth had pressed a thumb against his throat. He told me Uncle Gregory had marched into the house with the steady purpose of a man who signs checks for a living and refuses to be made a fool. Amelia stood beside him with a slim folder, cool as winter light, and a woman from her firm who asked quiet, pointed questions that left no room for decorations or excuses. Clarissa had begun with performance stares that glistened, shoulders that trembled, a speech about my cruelty and my abandonment, but Gregory cut through it with a stack of papers I knew by heart, balances that bled red, credit lines stitched to Harold's name like stolen labels, payment schedules that would have swallowed our roof beam by beam. "The room," he said, went so silent the clock sounded like a hammer. Clarissa tried to blame miscommunications, tried to turn debt into investment, tried to make vanity sound like sacrifice for the family. Amelia would not have it. She laid out a ledger on the dining table and asked Clarissa to walk line by line through each purchase, date, and signature. Somewhere between a jeweler's invoice and a boutique shipment she had signed for on a weekday she claimed to be off. The last of Clarissa's story unraveled like thread from a cheap hem. Harold's words shook as he told me that Gregory announced there would be no financial assistance, not now, not under deception, and that if Harold wanted counsel, he would receive it only under strict conditions: full transparency, separate accounts, a written plan to repay obligations without touching my house, and a hard pause on any display disguised as tradition. The party, in other words, evaporated. Clarissa's face, Harold said, turned the color of chalk. She swung between rage and pleading, claiming ruin if there was no grand gathering, as though spectacle could be currency. Then came the part that slipped a knife under my rib. Harold admitted that when he heard the words, "Your mother's deed," when Amelia's colleague asked to see the title because certain loan applications hinted at collateral that wasn't theirs to pledge, he felt something cold and shameful. "I didn't know," he said. "I should have known. I should have looked." I let the silence sit with us, not to punish him, but to show him the shape of it. Finally I told him that the deed was protected now, that there were legal walls where once there had been hope and trust, and that those walls would remain. He breathed out, long and low, and then asked so carefully I could hear the boy he once was, whether I might come home to help smooth things over, to show goodwill, to make everyone comfortable while they handled the mess. I felt pity stretch one hand toward me, but wisdom took the other. I told him I loved him, that I would speak with him after the holidays, that comfort had been my trade for too long, and that healing would not grow in the same room where denial had been planted. He did not argue. He said he understood. I hope he did. Minutes later, Clarissa sent me a message, a river of voice notes, each a different season. "How dare you, you ungrateful woman? You are destroying this family. Come back and fix what you broke. I always treated you well. You owe us respect. We will remember this." I listened to none of them to the end. I set the phone down and opened the window wide enough for the sea to answer for me. Its steady hush rolled over the threshold like a lullaby that belonged to no one. I realized, standing there, that I did not crave revenge, only the clean floorboards of truth under my feet. I walked to the corner shop near the inn and bought a simple notebook with pale blue lines, and on the first page I wrote my name, not mother, not housekeeper, not accommodation, but Eleanor. And then I wrote the first sentence of the story I had denied myself for years. I am allowed to live the rest of my life in the present tense. Back in the room, I brewed tea and planned the smallness of the coming days. A museum with creaking stairs and a docent who speaks as if history were a neighbor. A matinee at the little theater where no one asks who cooked. A Sunday service in a chapel with a cracked bell, and congregants who sing off-key with glorious sincerity. The world would keep spinning without my hands at every crank. The people in my kitchen would resolve their business beneath the bright glare of daylight, and I, at 80, would apprentice myself to peace. I sent one final message to Harold: no advice, no instruction, just a simple line. When you are ready to talk with honesty, I will be ready to listen with love. Then I placed the phone face down, turned toward the window, and let the tide write its repeating lesson across the sand. Come forward. Go back, return gentler, and begin again. The days that followed passed like chapters in a quiet book, each page filled not with drama, but with the soft texture of freedom. I walked along the shoreline in the mornings, letting the damp sand press its cool pattern against the soles of my shoes, the waves curling near my ankles like old friends whispering greetings. In the afternoons, I explored the little town, its market stalls with jars of honey and pickled peaches, its second-hand shop with shelves that smelled of cedar and dust, its park where children played tag beneath oaks that had been standing longer than I had. Nobody there knew me as Harold's mother or Clarissa's live-in maid. They knew me only as Eleanor, an older woman with careful eyes and a measured gait, and that anonymity wrapped around me like a quilt. Meanwhile, my phone continued to pulse with messages. Some were Harold's, tender and torn, as he tried to balance loyalty to his wife with the knowledge that her lies had nearly drowned them both. Others were Clarissa's venom disguised as desperation, her voice rising like a cornered animal, insisting that I had orchestrated her downfall, that I had betrayed her trust, that her humiliation was my doing. I read none of them to the end. There was no need. The truth had already spoken, louder than any message could. Her family's silence in those texts said more than words. No more checks, no more sympathy, no more illusions. By the fourth evening, Harold sent a message that felt different. It was short, raw, stripped of pretense. "Mother, I'm sorry. I didn't protect you. I didn't see her for who she was. I don't know what happens next, but I want to come by the inn to talk. Please let me." I sat with those words for a long while. Love and pain mingled inside me, because a mother's heart never stops wanting to mend, even when the child has grown careless. But wisdom whispered that wounds need air before they can be healed. I wrote back, "Not yet. Finish what you need to face first. Then come to me, honest and whole." That night I sat in the inn's lounge, where a pianist played an old hymn I used to hum while shelving books back at the library. The melody wrapped around me like a memory, and I realized how many years had passed since I allowed myself the luxury of simply listening. For so long, my ears had been tuned to demands, pots clanging, orders called, footsteps pounding for service. Now they were tuned to music, to silence, to my own breathing. It felt like being reborn at 80 years old. On Christmas morning, I rose early, brewed coffee, and stepped out onto the balcony of my little suite. The ocean stretched wide and endless, the sun rising as if the world itself were unwrapping a gift. I thought of the house an hour away, guests, confused, food unprepared, decorations absent. But instead of guilt, I felt a serenity that surprised even me. This was not my burden anymore. They would eat what they prepared, celebrate how they wished, face the truth they had sown. And I, Eleanor, would spend the day walking by the sea, reading the notebook I had begun, writing down pieces of my story that had waited too long to be told. That evening, when the tide was high and the lamps along the pier glowed like little fires, I closed my notebook and pressed it to my chest. For the first time in decades, I felt not just alive but free. And I knew this: freedom, once claimed, cannot be returned like borrowed clothing. It becomes part of you, stitched into your skin, and it guides every step you take from that moment on. The final day of my holiday came draped in golden light, the kind that softens everything it touches. I walked the pier slowly, leaning on the railing, watching the gulls swoop and dive for scraps of fish left behind by the boats. Each wave that curled beneath me carried a memory away. Years of scrubbing dishes long after midnight, of ironing dresses I would never wear, of cooking for rooms filled with laughter that never included me. I let those memories drift into the salt air until they felt distant, like old photographs fading in the sun. When I returned to my room, I packed my small suitcase with the same calmness I had unpacked it. Each fold of cloth felt like closure, each zip of the case a quiet vow. I was not returning home as the same woman who had left. The Eleanor who once swallowed her words was gone. In her place stood someone who had rediscovered her own worth. Before leaving the inn, I sat one last time by the window overlooking the sea and opened my notebook. I wrote a final entry for this chapter. I am not defined by the demands of others. I am defined by the courage to choose myself, even when the world calls it selfish. And at 80 years old, I am just beginning again. I closed the notebook gently, slipped it into my bag, and smiled. This was not an ending. It was the true beginning I had waited a lifetime to claim. When I arrived back at my house, the silence was heavy. The decorations Clarissa had promised her family never appeared. The kitchen was bare, except for the note I had left days earlier, now wrinkled and abandoned on the counter. There was no laughter, no feasting, no triumph. Only the quiet truth of a family forced to face the consequences of lies without my hands to soften the blow. Harold's car was gone. Clarissa's heels no longer echoed in the halls. For once, the house belonged solely to me again. I brewed myself a cup of tea, sat in my armchair by the window, and watched the sun sink low over the neighborhood I had called home for decades. And in that stillness, I realized that peace is not something others can give. It is something you decide to take back. Now, as I share this story with you, I do it not to boast, but to remind you of a truth I nearly forgot. No one is too old to claim their freedom, and no one should ever be reduced to silence in their own home. My journey may sound dramatic, but at its core, it is simple. It is the story of a woman who remembered her name after years of being called everything else. If you are listening, I ask you to stay with me a little longer. Subscribe to this channel, not only because stories like mine will continue, but because in this community we hold each other up. Here, your story matters just as much as mine. Share your experiences in the comments. Tell us the moments when you found courage, or the times you are still searching for it. Let others read your words and feel less alone. And if this story touched you, if it sparked even a small flame of recognition, let us know what you learned from it. Did it remind you of your own strength? Did it show you that dignity can be reclaimed at any age? Together, we can build more than just a space for videos. We can build a circle of voices, each one strong, each one valuable, each one carrying lessons worth remembering. So, my dear listeners, subscribe, comment, share, and most of all, keep writing your own chapters with courage. Because freedom is not only mine to claim, it is yours as well, waiting quietly, ready for the day you decide to step into it. And when you do, may you, like me, discover that sometimes the greatest gift you can give to the world is the version of yourself that is no longer afraid to live.